Hello and welcome back to my studio. It's Lois here from Lois and Morgana Davidson Art, and today I'm going to show you how I painted this beautiful late spring scene with a glowing yellow canola field in the middle ground and then some hills in the distance. I'm using a piece of Saunders Waterford cold press watercolour paper. It's 11 inches by 15 inches or about 28 centimetres by 38 centimetres. And the first thing I do is to very loosely draw out the scene in pencil, just putting in the main features, the hills, the horizon, maybe the path, and just keeping it really simple, just giving myself a bit of a guide to follow as I paint wet in wet. My board's at an angle of about 20 degrees and my paper is taped to my board with decorator's masking tape. I'm using a large mop brush to wet the whole of the sky and the distant hills, and then I'm going to paint a wet in wet sky using a mixture of cobalt blue with a bit of cerulean blue in it, and then I shall introduce some burnt sienna for the sky. Just cleaning up any water pool that's pooled along the horizon where it meets the dry page, and then just pulling that paint across the page, leaving some gaps for clouds. And then I shall mix a bit of burnt sienna into that lovely blue colour to give me some darker grey clouds. As I paint into the wet sky, you can see everything softening and diffusing. That lovely subtle grey that was created just from the blue with burnt sienna, strengthening it up to slightly darker value grey. And as soon as I'm happy with my sky, I stop there, leave it alone, and then I'll get this middle ground tree line in while everything's wet in wet across the sky, so it'll just soften and blend into the sky to give me a nice soft transition. Still using my large mop brush, and this is a mixture of sap green with a bit of hooker's green and a bit of burnt sienna mixed into it to just bring that rich, vivid green down, make it a little bit more earthy. Stopping at the edge where the paper is dry to get a nice sort of clean, hard edge, which will be the top of my hill. I can clean that edge off if I need to, and clean off any sort of bead of paint that's forming across that edge with a clean, damp brush. All that's left to do now for this first layer is to put in the roadway or the path. I'm going to use that same grey and following my pencil outline, bringing the path forward, getting wider as I approach the foreground to give some sort of sense of perspective. Once I've got my road or path in, I shall use my palette knife just to help give me a little bit of directionality, maybe some texture to the roadway, maybe even the suggestion of a few road markings. And now that's done, I'm going to leave it to dry completely. So here's the dry painting, and now I'm going to work into the field in the middle and foreground using my large Princeton Aqua Elite Mottler brush, making sure that I leave an unpainted strip between the middle ground trees and this field. This field's painted with a mixture of raw sienna, raw umber and a bit of burnt sienna. I'll darken it up with a bit of Payne's grey as well across the foreground. Trying to keep it a dry brush here and there, keeping some texture to be suggested in this field. And of course that unpainted strip there is for my lovely bright canola field, which I want to put in nice and bright and fresh, which is why I'm leaving that unpainted. Just a little bit of the same green mixture as the trees on the edge of the roadway or path. I'm going to use my palette knife to scrape through this paint to go back to the white of the paper or the sort of slightly stained paper from the colour that I've put onto it to help to give me some texture and maybe a few sort of field markings, that sort of thing. Because everything's still wet, these will fill in and soften, and I can soften things back a bit as well, a bit later if I want to, by just putting in a few darks here and there and using the tips of the modeler brush, as I say, to sort of soften back in places. And now using my size 14 round brush and lemon yellow, which is a beautiful, fresh, quite cool yellow, and which contrasts beautifully with the more earthy colours here, the warmer colours, I can put in that beautiful bright flash of yellow for the canola field. And then I can put a little bit of that lemon yellow into the field, just dot it around here and there. So maybe it's a suggestion of some yellow canola flowers sort of growing up amongst the crop that's growing in the field at the front. Just a touch that colour sort of links the field in the midground with the foreground. Still using the number 14 or size 14 round brush, which is an Escoda Perla brush, I've mixed up a nice dark grey from my cobalt blue, burnt sienna and a touch of Payne's grey, but I've watered it down quite a lot and I'm painting in my distant hills. What I need to do is get the outline of the hills in and then use a clean damp brush to sort of soften it off across the base. And then an even more distant row of hills behind that in a paler colour to give me a sense of distance and aerial perspective. And then I can soften that back so that there's a sort of a misty transition between each line of hills that goes back into the distance. And once I'm happy with the positioning of those brush strokes for the distant hills, I can use my palette knife if I want to, just to drag a little bit of extra texture, just to suggest maybe sort of distant forests or villages or anything like that in the distance, just by adding that little bit of variety to those marks. And then just a few little marks in the foreground field just for a bit of suggested detail. I can soften these back with my finger if they look a little bit too bright or if they stand out a bit too much. So that's the second layer done. I'm just going to leave this to dry and then come back and finish the painting. So now everything's dry, I've mixed up a few different, slightly different hues of green. I'm starting off with a fairly bright green, which is mixed from sap green with a touch of hooker's green. And then I've got a darker mixture that's had some burnt sienna added to it to make it a bit more earthy, and then an even darker mixture that's got a touch of perylene green and maybe some Payne's grey in it. And I shall work across this tree line, making sure I keep it sort of nice and dark against the hard edge of the canola field, and that will make that yellow really stand out and contrast against the very dark value and shadows in this tree line. I'm using a small calligraphy brush for this, but any small brush that holds enough paint and that's got a good point that you can sort of use to paint these little calligraphic brush strokes. So you get a nice sort of uneven looking edge, which suggests all the different trees in the tree line without actually having to overtly paint each tree individually. Trying to get the paint to be very slightly sort of cooler as it goes back a little further into the distance, And for that I've added just a touch of blue to the paint. But I still want most of this tree line, as it's in the middle ground, to still have plenty of dark value to really make the canola field stand out and to show off the pale distance of the distant hills and the aerial perspective that's created with those paler, cooler colours. So we're nearly finished, just a few finishing touches to darken up the field, and then to just scrape the hints of a few little maybe tree trunks just catching the light. Not many, just a couple. And then a few more little suggestions of things growing in that field, softening back with my finger if I need to. And then using the rigger brush and Payne's Grey, a final flourish of a tiny little fence dividing the earthy front field in the foreground from that bright canola field. And that little touch of black there, or dark grey, for the fence is just the final flourish that really makes the canola field stand out, along with the deep contrast in the shadows of the tree line. Trying to keep my marks nice and loose, and then coming down into the foreground and using that nice dark colour and the rigger brush just to put in a few darker little marks here and there in the foreground field, which I can soften back with my finger if they look a little bit too bright. And I think I'm pretty much done, so I'll remove the tape. That reveals the clean white border and helps us to see the painting with fresh eyes, and we can see if we need to do anything else to it. But I'm quite happy with that. I'm really pleased with the way it's turned out. It's a nice, simple painting that's suitable for beginners or more experienced painters, and I hope you'll enjoy painting this lovely fresh scene. And while it's quite a simple scene, I think it's a great scene to practice contrasts both in value and in colour, and in sort of contrasting as well your wet in wet, softly diffused sky with the harder marks that you then paint into the painting using the wet on dry technique. So many thanks for watching. Please give us a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. And thank you so much to everybody that supports the channel on Patreon. We really do appreciate each and every one of you. Many thanks again. I'll see you again soon. Take care and happy painting. Bye.